What? What do you mean?
A lot.
Thing we think our partner is capable of is wanting us dead. In a normal relationship, we believe that to be the exact opposite of love. As time goes on and the relationship grows stronger, we become more and more comfortable with each other, often to the point of revealing our biggest secrets. However, there sometimes comes a moment at the end of that relationship when we regret revealing those secrets because love rarely ends happily. In that situation, a former partner may feel unveiling that secret is a way to take revenge over the one that spurned them. Although we all may fear that our former mate may use what they know against us, I've only known one person who was willing to kill another human to ensure that never happened. Soon after completing college, I ran into a girl I had once briefly worked with. For the sake of privacy, we'll call her Mandy. I've been a manager at the GameStop located in my hometown, a place you've never heard of, so I'll leave out the name. Since I was a manager, having a relationship with another employee was frowned upon. So, despite our obvious attraction for each other, we kept things professional. However, knowing that there was no such barrier to us now, we soon started seeing each other, and it quickly became physical. Looking back, I think we were rushing things because we felt we had a lot to make up for. And the amazing thing about relationships that are so passionate is they are exciting, but unfortunately burn out quickly, and all that passion can turn into hate. This was the case with us, and it was all from her side. She was unable to accept that I would move for my new job and not stay in our little hick town with her. We managed to go our separate ways and agreed not to see each other again. My life went ahead and I moved to Dallas to take a new job. My memory of my time with Mandy was fading away. This was all changed when I received a phone call from a police detective from back home. He said that he needed me to come into the station and speak to him. He was quick to assure me that I was not being investigated, but it was an important situation involving my relationship with Mandy. I'll admit right now I was freaking out, but also puzzled considering it had been several months since we had even spoken to each other. When I arrived at the police station, I was led into an empty room and asked to sit and wait for the detective. This did little to help my feelings of dread. After waiting for what seemed like hours, the detective came into the room and sat across from me. What he said to me next would change my life forever. We received a tip from one of our confidential informants that your ex-girlfriend was looking to hire a hitman. After a 2-month-long investigation, we sent in one of our undercovers to meet with her to discover her true intentions. At the end of that meeting, we felt we had enough evidence to take Miss Lawrence into custody. After several hours of interrogation, she confirmed that you were indeed the target. My jaw dropped, and I asked the detective to repeat what he had just said. There was no way Mandy would do something like this. For a moment, I thought it was all a cruel joke. This kind of thing doesn't happen in real life, just in movies. But once I saw the file and heard the recording of her admitting to it, I had no other choice but to accept it. The detective and I spent the next 3 or so hours discussing my history with Mandy from beginning to end, and were still left with no motive. She refused to give a reason, and I was at a loss myself. Okay, the aftermath of our breakup was rather rocky, but nowhere near the point of having me terminated, so to speak. Hiring a hitman is an extreme answer to any problem, and I couldn't think of any that severe between us. We had to wait almost a year for the trial to start, but when it finally did, we got the answer to our number one question. It appeared that one night, Mandy had let slip to me a story pertaining to an ex-boyfriend that she was mortified I would repeat. She had woken up with this guy, and when she discovered he was engaged a few months later to a new girl, she contacted the girl and told her all sorts of lies about him. The lies scared the new girlfriend so much that she canceled the wedding and dumped him. She had apparently agreed to not tell the guy the source of the stories or even exactly what was said. She just bailed. To make the story even more crazy, Mandy was now going out with the same guy again. From what she said in her testimony, she was afraid that I would tell the guy that she was the person that destroyed his impending marriage. The funniest thing about this whole situation is that I didn't even remember that story until she repeated it in court. I guess the relationship was that important to her. So important that she would attempt to take the life of another she once claimed to also love. Well, anyway, Mandy was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years, and I imagine she'll probably be out in about 7. So Mandy, if you ever do read this and manage to get out of jail, I have a great idea. Let's never meet again.
Can I be your friend?
In my 20s and 30s, I lived in an apartment.
-4. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You make a very good curry, my friend.
Bro, you sound Indian, so like I'm just saying you're Indian, you know?
Complex and upscale section of a large Dallas suburb. I had moved there with my longtime girlfriend, but within 2 years we went our separate ways. Despite the split, I decided to stay in the apartment because it was a great neighborhood and I never liked moving if I didn't have to. I was able to make friends on occasion with the tenants nearby, but for most of my time living there, I spent alone. This wasn't really a problem as I worked long days during the week, so I was usually too tired in the evenings to want to socialize. The weekends were spent cleaning and completing the chores that had remained undone from days or weeks before. However, when I did find myself at loose ends on the occasional Saturday evening, I would invariably find amusement at one of the coffee shops or bars that were densely scattered throughout the neighborhood. My hangout of choice soon became a small English-style pub conveniently located across the street from my block of apartments. The quiet, laid-back tone of the bar was what I liked most about it, but soon I would also make friends with several of the employees. Generally, the same group of people worked every Saturday night, so we quickly got to know each other well. Lisa, a tall and curvy redhead, caught my eye almost immediately. She had been the first girl in God knows how long I had been truly interested in. Luckily, I discovered she felt the same way about me, and we started seeing each other on our corresponding days off. We did our best to take things slowly, considering we had both just ended our long-term relationships. Hers had only ended just recently, and her ex had been very jealous and possessive. I liked her a lot, so I was willing to give her as much space as she needed. The following couple of weeks went by smoothly, especially when it came to Lisa and I. We continued to see each other on our nights off and would occasionally meet at the coffee shop next door to the bar and chat on our breaks. On Saturday nights, I would hang out at the pub. I would generally be met with friendly faces, but there was one bartender that used to give me dirty looks and ignore me if I asked him for help. One night, soon after I started dating her, I asked Lisa if she knew what the guy's deal was with me, and she told me something I wasn't expecting. The rude bartender was her ex, the possessive one she had just broken up with. I naturally was a bit confused and asked her why she was still working on the same nights as him. I didn't expect her to just quit her job because she had broken up with a fellow employee, but surely she could have asked her boss to change her schedule so the two of them wouldn't have to work together. Bringing this up, I tried to show enough concern while not seeming too controlling, since I knew that had been one of the problems in their relationship. After all, we were just casually dating. We had agreed that we were still free to see other people if we wanted. The last thing I wanted was to make her think I was just like him. She assured me that they had agreed to not let it affect their working relationship, and besides, the bar owners frowned on employees dating each other. She was afraid that if she had mentioned the situation to her boss, he would punish her in some way or even fire her, so she just kept it to herself. Despite my concerns, I figured that she knew her ex better than I did, and if she didn't foresee any problems, I'd have to take her word for it. Besides, if the most I got from the guy was the evil eye once in a while, I probably didn't have much to worry about him either. At least, that's what I thought. Things between Lisa and I continued to progress well. So well, in fact, she started staying over Saturdays, and the idea of her still working with her ex-boyfriend had slipped completely out of my mind. I would meet her after work and walk with her back to my place. This was our weekly routine until the winter started to really kick in. By December, it had become too cold to walk, so I started picking her up in my car. One late Saturday night, I met her at the back door of the bar like I did every week. As she walked toward the car, I could tell she was upset about something. When she got to the car, I asked her if she was okay. She cut me off and coldly assured me she was only tired, and asked if I could take her to the gas station so she could get some coffee. Since I had no reason to think she was anything other than worn out from work, I agreed. As she came back to the car from the store, the bright lights lit up her face. I could tell she had been crying. Her face still held that deep red tone. When she got back in the car, she said she just wanted to go straight to bed. The urge to ask her what the matter was consumed me, but her icy demeanor stopped me. I hadn't seen her like this before, so I didn't know how persistent I could be before it sparked an argument. After all, maybe she was just tired, like she said, and her nerves were frayed. When we arrived at my place, she continued to say nothing. I did notice she stayed back near the passenger side of my car. She hadn't followed me to my front door like usual. Noticing this, I turned back to her to see if I could see what was holding her attention, but as soon as I began walking back to the car, she snapped out of her daze and followed me to the door. Once we finally made it inside, she went straight to my bed to lie down. I was confused by her behavior. She seemed severely exhausted, but wired at the same time. I glanced at her and noticed she was looking through the blinds next to my bed. Outside the window, the bright headlights from a car lit up her face, and the bedroom she was in. Upon seeing the lights, she rolled off the bed and onto the floor and started screaming, "No!" Before one word could leave my mouth, 2 loud bangs and the crashing of glass filled the bright little bedroom. My instincts must have taken over because I found myself lying flat on the floor with my hands on my head. The screeching of car tires quickly came and went, and just as quickly the room went dark and silent as it had been moments before. Looking up from my hands, I saw Lisa's motionless form curled into the fetal position at the foot of the bed. I felt fear creep over me. Not because of the bedlam that had just occurred. I was still unsure if it was real. I was afraid Lisa was dead. Just as I started to lunge to her place on the floor, she sprung out of her ball and began wailing. Her eyes darted around the room, as did her hands, reaching out as if though she had been blinded. Pity overwhelmed me. The sight of her panic and fear tore at my heart. Grabbing out to her, she took my hand and pulled me to her. She continued her muffled wail as she rocked slowly in the dark, cold room. The police arrived sometime that morning. Not sure when, although it was likely within a few minutes of the gunshots. I did my best to tell the detectives what had occurred, but it was Lisa that had seen the attack firsthand. It took a week or more before she was able to fill in the gaps. Apparently, things had not been going as smoothly as she had led me to believe. The ex had been harassing her, leaving violent messages on her phone, threatening her and myself. She had done her best to keep him at arm's length, but everything had come to a head that night. He had shown up at the bar around closing time, ranting about how he was going to blow us away and then end himself. He had driven away before I had arrived, so she hoped he had went home, but it seems he followed my car back to my apartment. The rest, of course, you already know. The highway patrol managed to catch up to him a few days later. He never said what exactly he had intended to do with us, but in the end, I guess that doesn't really matter. The damage was done regardless. Of course, a relationship would have to be rock solid to make it through such a harrowing situation like that, and I guess ours wasn't. Lisa contacted me just once more to tell me goodbye. She was moving west to stay with some friends, and we agreed it was probably best that I didn't know where she was moving to, just in case. I moved back to my hometown that spring, and I hope to this day Lisa will find the peace she deserves. I have a sister about 5 years older than me. She always had addiction issues, at least as long as I can remember. On top of that, her choice of men had been just as bad, if not worse. She moved out at 17 and straight into an apartment with 3 other addicts. One of them was a 30-something-year-old tweaker with a long history of dating barely legal girls. Of course, my sister fell head over heels for him and ended up moving in with him and his mother within a month of meeting him. This relationship followed the usual pattern most of her others had in the past. They'd score dope together. He'd beat her up for taking more than her share and then beg her forgiveness. She would move back in with our family, but his begging and crying always drew her back to him. Over time, the apologies came less and less until she believed it was her fault for his actions and gave herself over to him completely. It didn't take long before the drugs take their toll, and she was unable to hold down a job for more than a few days. Naturally, he couldn't be expected to work because of some phantom ailment or condition he suffered from. His only solution for their problem was to turn her onto the streets to sell her body for the substances they so badly craved. It took a near-death beating from him to get her to see him for the garbage he was. She ran home to my parents, and they took her in with open arms. Thankfully, the horror of almost losing her life brought her to the clarity she had lacked in the past. Her determination to get clean and change her life for the better was finally strong enough for her to pull it off. My parents once again funded a 90-day stint in a rehab program, the 4th time in fact. We were all pleased to see her taking it seriously, and even after leaving the treatment facility, she continued to attend NA meetings and keep clean. She took a job as a secretary at a local doctor's office and stayed there for several years until she left to raise her first child. Perhaps the biggest change in her life was finding God. She had begun attending a small Baptist church in the area and was soon volunteering there and at other church-run organizations on her days off. Since our family had never been the church-going type, this choice had seemed the strangest to us, but I was unhappy she had found a source of solace and security after all she had suffered. About 6 months after her release from rehab, my sister met a handsome young man when she was volunteering at the church food kitchen. He was also a volunteer there in addition to a leader of another local church's choir. Despite her attraction to him, she had learned from her past bad decisions to take things slow, even though she had found everything about him wonderful. This courtship lasted 2 years, and in that time, he did his best to show her how much he was unlike the other men that had been in her past. When the time came, and he asked for her to marry him, he made sure to get the father's approval. Of course, my father and the rest of the family approved of the kind and respectful young man. We couldn't be happier that she had finally found a loving partner. The wedding was beautiful and couldn't have went more smoothly. However, when they came back from the honeymoon a week later, what had occurred shocked us all. The first night after they had reached the hotel, they had an argument over her tipping the man who brought the food to their room. He said she had made him look unmanly because she had not let him be the one who tipped the man. She saw this as no big deal, and in an attempt to cool the situation, she apologized. This only served to make him even more angry, and the fight escalated to the point of him slapping her. Almost as soon as it happened, he began apologizing profusely and blamed his outburst on jet lag. Thinking it the most wise choice at the time, she accepted his apology, but in her mind she knew that when they got back home, the marriage was over. It broke her heart that it had ended this way, but she had made a pledge to herself all those years ago in that hospital bed that she would never let a man take advantage of her love again. Just as she promised, the divorce was filed the following week. As usual with men like him, he spent all his waking moments begging on the phone for forgiveness and asking her to come home to him, sometimes even breaking down in sobs. My sister did her best to ignore his groveling and turn her life on to a new and better path. For the most part, she managed to achieve this, at least until we took the choice away from her. One Monday morning, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, my sister left for work like usual. However, around noon, the office called her home to find out that there was a reason she wasn't coming to work. We assured her boss that she had left for work at 7:30 like she did every day. An unanswered call to her cell phone freaked us out, and we alerted the police right away. The only conclusion we could come up with was that her ex-husband had abducted her, or something much worse. We gave the cops all the information we could think of. All was left was to just sit and wait. The next 2 days moved at a snail's pace until we received a phone call from the police that my sister had been found and she was still alive. They had tracked them down to a ramshackle cabin. A passing motorist saw her ex-husband's car and called in with the location. The state police managed to storm the cabin early in the morning, catching him off guard. We could see when we reached the hospital that he had beaten her pretty badly. My intuition tells me he did much more, but I would never dream of asking her to relive it. We were all just overjoyed to have her back. The trial didn't happen for another year, and when it did, my sister showed her strength by testifying against that monster. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 20 years. Believe it or not, my sister managed to move ahead. She was even able to find a lasting and loving marriage. I've been blessed with 2 beautiful nieces and hope to be blessed with more. Her new husband is the finest man I've ever known and would give his life for my sister and his daughters. She has finally found that stable life she had been searching for so long. There is, however, a cloud hanging over this idyllic family. They were just notified that her ex-husband is being released on parole. After serving only 12 years of his sentence, he has conned the parole board into believing he was a new man. For the sake of my family and my sisters, I hope he really has. I'm what people like to call old school, which means I like to do things the old way. When I want coffee, I make it in a coffee maker in my kitchen. If I need a new piece of clothing, I go to a men's store and buy it. And when I want to read a new book, I go to a library and borrow it. If that's not an option, I visit my local bookstore and buy it. Of course, I know it would likely be cheaper to order from Amazon, but I prefer to spend my money locally with people from my community. On a recent visit to my favorite bookstore, I was unable to find the title I was interested in. I was pleasantly surprised to be helped by a hot little item we'll call Rhonda. She notified me that the book was only available by special order. I gave her my information so the book could be shipped to the store and I could pick it up when it arrived. We flirted back and forth until, before I knew it, we decided to go on a date together. We set it for that Saturday and I went on my way. Saturday arrived and I decided to take her to dinner at one of those big chain family-style restaurants. She struck me as a meat and potatoes kind of girl and I knew this place made both well. She was pleased with the place as I had hoped. Despite being a petite and thin girl, she managed to put away her massive entree easily. I was pleased to see she felt comfortable enough around me to be herself. After dinner, we enjoyed our desserts and coffee and chatted about our lives. When the subject of her last boyfriend came up, she told me the basics of how they met and how the relationship ultimately ended. From what she said, they didn't have much in common and had only spent a few weeks together. That was until the fool decided to break up with her through a text. Even though we agreed that this was a low thing to do, she easily laughed it off and told me how she had poisoned his dog for revenge. I froze in place as she continued to chuckle her way through her horrid tale. The look on her face as she told it proved that the idea that this was a psycho reaction never entered her warped mind. I quietly choked down the rest of my dessert, trying not to betray the outright fear coursing through me. I had met some crazy girls in my time, but she was the definition of overreaction. I acted as normally as I could on the drive to her house, and as she left my car, oblivious to the fact that we'd surely never see one another again, I counted myself lucky. I would hate to see how she would react if I dumped her after a short relationship. At least I didn't have a dog. I happily went back to my normal life and tried to put Rhonda out of my mind. There wasn't a peep from her until that next Saturday came around. She called 3 times and left as many messages through the course of the day, but I did my best to ignore her. Fortunately, the rest of the weekend was quiet. Things remained that way until Monday when she began blitzing my phone with confused messages. Each one was more and more frantic. The last was left Friday evening with just the desperate statement, "I thought we had made a connection. You've broken my heart." I know I may sound heartless, but I'd had my share of crazy relationships, and some turning violent. The last thing I wanted was to get into another. I was pleasantly surprised not to hear from her again after that last message. Things went back to normal, and I had reassured myself that regardless of how crazy she could become, she'd never be able to come to my house and stab me to death in my sleep or something insane like that. As if she could hear my thoughts, a text popped up in my phone a couple of weeks later. It was from Rhonda, and it simply said, "You forgot something." My heart sank. That's when I remembered the book. The book I'd ordered from her and had given her my address to do it. That's why I'm writing this crazy story. I need help from all of you out there reading this. What should I do? I don't care about some stupid book. There's something much more serious going on here. Please, help me. I'm purposely going to leave out names and certain details of this story. My main reason is to respect my aunt's privacy and that of the other families involved. I wouldn't have told it all, but I feel a certain responsibility to remind people that the police are not always right. My mother's sister had been in and out of our life throughout my childhood. Once she had been able to conquer her addiction problems, she became a much more important part of our family. However, before she could get herself together, she was the victim of a hideous crime. One late night, she was helping a friend find a motel room when they were kidnapped and left for dead. Thankfully, my aunt was able to crawl to a main road for help, but despite this, her friend didn't survive. She managed to identify one of the men involved, and the police caught up with him quickly, but since she was unable to give them many details on the other killer, the police doubted his existence. Considering the extent of her injuries, they assumed she had just imagined him. Although it was obvious that it would have been much harder for one man to abduct two young women, they wrote off her claims as just another irrational female. She did her best to return to the drug-free path she had set herself upon before the whole thing happened. Her days were filled with work, and her free time was spent doing her best to prevent the police from closing the case. Despite the fact the cops continued to believe that her attacker acted alone, she was continually providing them with similar crimes where the witnesses identified two young men. Regardless of the evidence, her claims fell on deaf ears. As the months dragged on, she became more convinced that the second killer would never be found. After Thanksgiving, the family focused more on the coming Christmas holiday and all the goodies that come with it. Whether we wanted to or not, my aunt and I were nominated by my dad to pick up a present for my mom. He would be working out of town until the last week of the month, so he gave us the job. I don't have to tell you how chaotic the Christmas shopping season is, but we managed to achieve our goal a few days early. To celebrate our triumph, we decided to stop off and get some fancy coffee. The traffic was light, so we saw no reason the car behind us should be riding our bumper. He soon started flashing his lights, and when we came to an empty stretch of road, he pulled to the lane next to us and began ramming the side of the car. It was obvious at this point he was trying to run us off the road. I freaked out, of course. Being only 19 at this point, I had never been in a situation like this, and how I didn't crash right away is beyond me. The second time he rammed his car into mine, my aunt started yelling out, "That's him. That's the guy that killed," and she mentioned her friend. She immediately dialed 911 and told them what was happening. It took a couple of minutes before the highway patrol came into sight behind us. When we were about 50 yards from the roadblock, the man ramming us slowed down and tried to turn around, but another cop car behind us blocked him in. Realizing he had nowhere to go, he gave up. That Christmas was the best our family had ever had. The second killer eventually took a plea deal so he could avoid the death penalty. It wasn't until much later that the detectives told him he could have got away with his crime had he not tried to come after us. My aunt has yet to get an apology from the police department, but she's happy in the knowledge she was right when everyone else doubted her. Despite my many misgivings, I'm writing this story down because my counselors agree that doing so could be a positive step in my therapy. Since I've been here for almost a year, I assume that some of those involved in getting me better think it's time for me to move on with my life. I'm not so sure, but here we go. I was shy and bookish in high school. Because of that, I guess I failed to attract the attention of boys. I didn't really mind. Most of the boys I knew in school were jocks or immature gamer types. Besides, the last thing I had on my mind was dating. My focus was on school, and I was determined to get into the best college I could. Then maybe I would be able to cut out a small bit of time to meet someone. At least, that was my plan. Other than reading, my greatest love is music. All the best moments in my life are connected to a song. My best friend and I would go to every concert that we could. One year I counted and figured out we had been to 10 shows. So yeah, when I say greatest love, I mean it. In May of 2016, The Cure was playing the Bowl. So we went, and that night I met Adam. He looked like your average goth emo type guy. Somehow, we had made eye contact in that mass of thousands of people, and I guess this gave him the okay to come talk to me. Normally, I would have blown him off since I'm not interested in guys that look like they're trying to be cool. Look, I may be shy, but I have no problem telling people what I think of them. Before I could do the same to him, Adam flashed a smile so beautiful it melted my heart. Once he had gotten my attention, I began listening to what he was saying, and to my surprise, he was the smartest person I'd ever met. Usually I'm the smartest person in the room, wherever I go, but everything that came out of his mouth floored me. And that's all it took. I was in love. We spent the rest of the show talking about everything under the sun. I'm not even sure what songs The Cure played. For the first time in my life, music took a back seat to a boy. When I spoke, he actually listened, and when he did, he made the most mundane things sexy. When the concert ended, we exchanged numbers and made plans to get together as soon as possible. Since he lived in the next city over and had his own car, he promised to pick me up the next Saturday and take me somewhere I'd love. That week dragged by so slowly that I was unable to focus on anything else. When Saturday finally arrived, I started getting ready almost as soon as I woke up. It was my first date, and I wanted to be ready as soon as he called. Pretty sad, I know, but Adam was special. When he finally called, I told him to pick me up at the end of the block. I didn't want to have to introduce Adam to my grandparents. Don't get me wrong, they were great people, but traditional. Adam wouldn't have met up to their expectations, regardless of how smart he was. Our date turned out to be at a local upscale bistro coffee shop. It was by far the nicest place I had ever been, and I loved it. We shared a set of appetizers and finished the meal with coffee and dessert. Most of the boys I knew couldn't even say biscotti, let alone know what a bistro was, so I was impressed. The real surprise was after dinner when he took me to the large park on the edge of the city. We got there after 10, so we had the place to ourselves. We sat on a bench next to the lake and told each other the story of our lives. Once we were cuddled together, Adam looked over to me and placed a clumsy but tender kiss on my lips. It was the epitome of romantic. I always thought that I was above such tripe, but I discovered that when you fall in love, things such as this lose their cheesiness. We sat in silence for many minutes just talking in the beautiful scene. Then Adam began to speak in a quiet but concise voice. That was the first time I've ever kissed a girl. The tone of his voice was so cute, I was unable to stop myself from letting out a small laugh. I told him I wasn't laughing at him. I had just found the honesty of his confession so sweet. I couldn't help myself. About the time I got the last word from my mouth, I felt the sudden, stinging sensation of a slap across my mouth and chin. A warm, throbbing feeling continued to grow just below my nose, and the salty taste of blood filled my mouth. No, I can't do this right now. It's still too painful. Everything that happened is my fault anyway. Here we are again. It looks as if I've lost the battle against my masters. I had hoped that if I managed to put off finishing the story, the doctors would let it slide for at least the remainder of the year. Unfortunately, I was warned that if I continued to put off what they called the inevitable, they would be forced to drug me and make me relive it in my personal sessions. I'm not sure at this point which choice is worse, but I know by choosing to tell it here, I have some control on how the story is told. So, this is the option I've chosen. Once I realized I had been hit, I was frozen. Even though I could taste the blood in my mouth, the shock of being slapped by someone I loved was confusing. I know I was mortified to look at him in the face. The wait for another strike was agonizing, but it never came. At first, I thought he had ran away, but when I turned to look at him, his face was a frozen mask of shock. He looked as if though he had been the one who had been slapped, but once he realized I was facing him, the mask changed to one of fear and regret. I was at once overwhelmed by a blast of apologies and excuses. Despite all that was going on around me, all I could do was tell him to take me home. The apologies continued, but once he surrendered to the fact that his words were hopeless, he could only say, "Okay." On the walk and the long drive to my house, neither of us spoke. I don't know his thoughts, but when it came to me, I was still in a level of shock almost to the point of catatonic. As I walked to my front door, I could hear a string of muffled words coming from the car, but I was in no state to hear them or even care what they were. He slowly drove away, and that was the beginning of the end. I was unable to even comprehend what had happened for 2 days. My phone had been assaulted by calls from Adam since at least Sunday morning. I made no effort to listen to the messages he left, and once my box was full, the calls increased. I'm unaware of what occurred at school that Monday and honestly don't know when I got home. It wasn't until that night that I began slipping from my stupor. The fact that the guy I loved more than life itself had slapped me hit me far harder than he ever could. The dam broke free and I cried myself to sleep that night. I had no desire to go to school the next day, so I didn't. Besides being psychologically destroyed, the idea of explaining to my friends what had happened made me physically ill, too. I returned to school Thursday, but refused to answer my friends' questions until they decided to let it go and stop asking. Adam's calls continued, but became less frequent as the weeks dragged on until they all but stopped. I had decided that if he did call again, that I would answer. The time had finally arrived for me to confront him about hitting me and explain in clear terms that our relationship was over. Regardless of how sad it made me, I knew I would never be able to respect myself again. It wasn't long before he did call, and I answered just as I had planned. His voice was filled with joy and a tinge of surprise. Before he could say much, I interrupted him and let him know that any sort of relationship that we had been ruined by his behavior, and hung up the phone. The rest of the week was quiet, and my courage to tell him everything was over gave me a new hope that I may possibly survive this breakup. Unfortunately, Adam wasn't going to let that happen. He left me alone for a few days before he decided to take things to a new level. I felt that if he called, I was strong enough to deal with anything he had to say to me, but I was wrong. Look, I know I made a mistake, but it's your fault I did it. You shouldn't have laughed at me. I've given you plenty of time to get over it, so let it go so we can move on. His voice was so cold and what I could best describe as commanding. It sent a chill down my spine. I was so shocked at his inability to accept the situation. The best I could say was, "No, I'm sorry. We're done." And I hung up the phone, still somewhat confused. His ability to push the blame onto me so easily had me honestly bewildered. I couldn't fathom how someone so intelligent could be so sensitive. I actually caught myself asking if I was indeed at fault for his actions, but blew that from my mind quickly. Things went back to radio silence for a few days until he called with his ultimatum to me. "Look, I'm sick of this. Either we get back together, or I'll be forced to do something terrible to you and everyone you love. Without you, I have nothing to live for anyway." I could tell he had been crying. He tried to hide it, but the wavering in his voice gave it away. "Yeah, sure," was all I could say before I broke out in laughter and hung up. I was in awe of how someone could know someone such a short time and be so obsessed with them. That was the moment I realized I was over him, and I could smile for the first time in a long time. Life luckily returned to what it was before, and Adam faded away. Each year around my birthday, my mother would come into town and take me out to dinner to celebrate. My relationship with my mother is somewhat complex. I view her just like a normal child views a parent, despite only seeing her at the holidays. It was decided when I was much younger that I would live with my grandparents because of the nature of my mom's job. She worked for an insurance company assessing damage claims made by policyholders. Therefore, she was only around home a few days a month. Put this together with a deadbeat dad I hadn't seen since I was 2, and it only seemed natural I lived with my mom's parents. My mom showed up the night before my actual birthday and slept over. The next evening, we went to our favorite restaurant in LA. We spent our evening catching up, and that meant I told her about my brief but whirlwind romance with Adam. She was supportive of my decision to walk away and reminded me of my plans for my future, none of which had room for a relationship. Our evening was great as usual, and after dessert we made our way back to my grandparents' house. My mom's plan was to spend the night and give me my present in the morning. I was perhaps the happiest and most excited I had been in a long time. When we entered the house, it was oddly silent. It was a Sunday, so my grandfather was usually parked in front of the TV watching football until 10, and my grandmother was either sitting with him or doing something in the kitchen. But none of this was happening. The lights were off in the living room, which made my mom and I even more nervous. So as we entered it, I switched them on, and that's when we saw it. Now from this point, you'll have to rely on what others had told me, because when I saw what had been done, well, it all stopped there. Apparently, Adam tied both my grandparents' hands up and shot them. As if this wasn't horrible enough, he scrawled, "Who's laughing now?" on the living room wall in their blood. My mother informed the police of my history with Adam and the threats he had made. I was unable to answer any other questions they may have had. After a 3-day search, the police got a call about a young man's body being found on a bench near the lake at the park. It was Adam, and he had shot himself. In his warped mind, it was probably a way to ruin a special moment for me, or maybe he wanted to die at the last place he was happy. I can't even begin to imagine what was going on in his shattered psyche that awful night. I'm still not sure if I should be happy I was out that night or not. That was it. Adam was dead, so there was no one to try for the crime, so the police and everyone else involved moved on. Well, that is everyone else but me. My mom admitted me a few days after the murders. It was obvious that I wasn't handling the whole situation well, and I've been here ever since. It's been almost a year since the death of my grandparents and Adam. If there is one thing I have come to learn here is that these doctors, these people in charge, don't know anything. Writing down all the wretched things that happened and what led them to happening has only made me feel worse. Also, it has just reinforced what I have always believed, all the way back to the night it all unfolded. All this, everything that happened, is and was my fault. The following incident occurred in the late 90s when I was living in the States attending uni. I was about 19 at the time, and like most girls of my age, thought that nothing bad would ever happen to me. To be fair, I had managed to grow up without experiencing any real problems that I couldn't handle. Looking back, I guess I had been sheltered from the world, and this had made me somewhat spoiled. Carrying this mindset with me to university did me no good, and caused me to put myself in a situation that could have ruined my life forever. Like most of the other girls in my dorm, I enjoyed having a good time. Studies had their place, and some focused on them more than others, but almost all of us living there liked to party now and then. New Orleans is known all over the world for its party atmosphere, and its many bars and clubs play a large part in that atmosphere. It's a heaven on earth for young people looking for somewhere to have a good time and blow off steam. A group of us girls had the goal of going to every bar and club in town, or as many as would be possible in the 4 years we would be there. It was a lofty goal in any university town, but in New Orleans it was more of a quest. The weekend after the Christmas-New Year's holiday had ended and the term was to begin, a small group of us made plans to go out and party before school began that Monday. When that Saturday came around, I was the only one of the girls that wasn't ill. Not being one to let other sicknesses get in my way of having a good time, I decided to go out anyway. We had planned to check out a small neighborhood bar just off of Bourbon Street, so that was where I started the night. It had the usual comfortable atmosphere you get from a neighborhood bar. I met a couple of the usual customers, mostly folks who lived or worked in the area, but the best part of the place had to be the cute bartender that poured me my first drink. I was invited to sit at the table with a couple of the other students I knew, and we began catching up on how our holidays had worked out. They left the table a couple of minutes after I sat down because the couple they were supposed to meet there showed up and waved them over to join them at their table. Realizing I had yet to even take a drink of my pint, I took a long slug, leaving only the last quarter. It didn't take long before I started feeling very dizzy. My tolerance had certainly decreased over the holidays, but I knew it would certainly take more than half a pint to put me under the table. There had to be something wrong, but in my state, I was unable to even form lucid thoughts. A pair of older men I didn't recognize joined me at the table. Instead of asking if I was okay, they claimed to be friends of my roommates. When I stated that I felt ill, they quickly volunteered to escort me back to my dorm. Before I could even react, the other two men whisked me out of the door of the bar and down the street. Through my glassy eyes, I attempted to focus on the sidewalk and where they were leading me. Despite being at the point of near unconsciousness, I had the clarity to realize we were going in the opposite direction of my dorm. That realization filled my body with fear and caused me to panic. I began yelling in a slurred tone. No, not this way. Men quickly attempted to quiet me down and assure me they knew the way. The fear that I may fall completely unconscious must have given me a shot of adrenaline. There was no way I was going to let these guys take me to God knows where and do what else or worse. The yells sounded more like screams this time. A group of college-age men walked past us and I took my chance. Help me! Help me! It was the best I could muster, but it did its job. The group approached us and began asking if I was okay and what was going on. The two men with me tried to convince the group that I was just acting crazy, but the college guys didn't buy it. Hey, how about we call the cops and you can explain the situation to them? Upon hearing this, the two men ran away without another word. The college guys stayed with me until the police and ambulance arrived. They explained what had happened to the officers, and I was taken away to spend the night at the hospital. When the police followed up, I told them what I could piece together from my still murky memory. Unfortunately, I was unable to give them any idea of who had drugged me. All we could be certain of was that my drink had been the source of the drugs, but who had actually done the spiking, no one could say. The investigation ended up going nowhere since there was no clear suspects or information. I was forced to continue with school, uncertain if those two men would come after me again or try to victimize other unsuspecting women. The semester ended and I flew home, unsure if I would return in the spring. I made the decision to return, and I'm glad I did, considering I would go on to meet my future husband, Jerry, in my final year of university. The two gentlemen that attempted to abduct me were never arrested as far as I know, but it did come to light later that the cute bartender that poured my beer that night was being paid by the two unnamed men to drug the drinks of women that they pointed out to him. All these years later, I am still very aware of how lucky I was that night and how bad things could have went. If I'm ever blessed with a daughter, I will be sure to tell her that story when the time is right to ensure she does her best to never put herself in any position where she could come across any man like those two I met that night. I want to make it clear that I'm not posting this story here to scare anyone. Its one and only purpose is to remind you all that you are not almighty. You can be hurt, and there are men out there just sitting and waiting for a chance to take advantage of the smallest mistake. If you want to go out and have fun and blow off some steam, please do and enjoy yourself. However, keep the story in mind and let it serve as a warning. Please, always bring at least one friend along with you anytime you plan on going out. You never know. You may be the one that ends up saving a life. Its one and only purpose is to remind you all that you are not almighty. You can be hurt and they're just sitting waiting for a chance to take advantage of this small mistake. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job. Would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. But that's another story. I work night shift and have had some creepy stuff happen that just could be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. I'm a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who spends any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud sound. So to get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by central control. So I'm sitting at my desk and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it. And it opens about halfway and then just slams shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window, so the nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. So when the door slammed, I thought it was just the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window. No one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep. I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank because, frankly, he was kind of a jerk with absolutely no sense of humor. So I just thought it was a mechanical glitch. I sat down and I thought it was just everything just like changed. It felt colder. I felt like I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few, talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, inside, underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on shift with the key. Now, I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere, and I cannot find it. Now, in my office, there is a large closet that holds all supplies. This is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carried. Later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet and get something. I don't remember what, and sitting in the middle of the floor was my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after, so I go back in. And I swear, the whole atmosphere felt lighter. It was warmer, and I just felt more comfortable. After my shift, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut, with not a single person near the door in the hallway. I wish I could say that was the last time that happened, or that I got comfortable with it. I didn't, because each time it happened, it seemed that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, and it felt almost like being stopped. Things that went missing were found at different parts in the jail. My pen case in the woman's wing, my med sheets in the solitary central control room, my portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in some other part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember I said I felt like I was being stalked? Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had any doors click or open or slam shut. Their stuff didn't disappear and then reappear somewhere else. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down this type of incident never, ever occurred before. It got to the point for me that I just started staying in my office. I just got all my stuff that I needed for my shift and sat at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen again. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down. In 6th grade, I'm a senior now, and I had a friend. To preserve her own anonymity, I'll call her Jenny. I grew up outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, near New Cumberland in a borough called Lemoyne. The streets are very close together, and everyone lives near one another, and Jenny was no exception. I would walk over to her house and watch television or anime with her, as kids do. I don't remember exactly how the topic of her ghost came up, but we were all very invested in the paranormal. Jenny, me, and our whole slew of friends. Now, if you've ever been to Lemoyne, you would know that most of the houses are old and were added on, refurbished, remodeled, expanded. And most of these old houses are now townhouses. I think this is why Jenny had 2 closets. One closet was always closed for the most part. It was deep and it was always dark. The closet Jenny actually used to hold her clothes was on the opposite end of the room. This is why she never used the first closet. Jenny's room was always very cold, unnaturally so. The room would open and close often, and it just generally didn't feel right. Jenny had shelves across the length of her room, and on those shelves were the creepiest porcelain dolls, still in their boxes. Heirlooms from one of her relatives, I think. I never asked for specifics. The dolls would move in their boxes. They would turn one way or the other, always when we weren't looking. Repositioned enough for us to note a definitive change in their pose. It was spooky. Jenny called her ghost Mandy and said she was a little girl. Jenny also had a young sister, probably 3 or 4 at the time, and Mandy hated her. She would be scratched frequently. If her sister was in the room with us, we would be scratched too. We wouldn't notice them until later, as they didn't hurt, but I think they hurt her sister. They were on her arms for the most part, like someone clawed us. Looked like they were scabbed over in the way cuts do after a couple of hours. Always 3 of them. I think Jenny's sister got them on her back, and they were a lot less superficial. It got so bad, Jenny's mom forbade Jenny's sister from going in her room. I had a phone back in 2012. One of those phones with a full keyboard that you turn on its side and slide up. I took a picture of Jenny's open closet once, and unfortunately I no longer have the picture as the phone is probably in a landfill, but it clearly showed a girl's face, partially hidden by the clothes Jenny had hanging. Mostly fancy stuff in her dad's old suits. Eyes, nose, lips, hair, the whole 9 yards. Just her face peeking out, almost shyly. There wasn't any real malice in her gaze, not that I remember. She was just there. Well, Jenny's ghost became common knowledge among our friend group, so we decided to have this sort of junior seance, so to speak. I think there were 7 other people that came over for this. It was a whole planned out event, but we knew better than to bring a Ouija board. 7 people plus Jenny and I, so 9 total. We agreed to go into the closet in shifts. 6 would go in at once, then 4 would exit and the others would enter, since there wasn't a whole lot of room. It was big, but not big enough to hold 9, 11, and 12-year-olds at once. And a couple of our friends fancied themselves psychics. It was all very juvenile, and we were excited. I was one of the 3 who wasn't inside the closet at the time. Convenient, I know. The other 2 and I were pressing our ears to the door and hear what they were saying when all of a sudden we hear screaming and beating down the door, bowling us over, scrambling out of there. Apparently one of the girls who believed she could talk to the ghost placed her iPhone 3 or 4 or whatever she had on a little shelf in the closet and said, "If you're here with us, move this phone," or something to that effect. According to another friend who was in the closet, she had repeated a couple of times. It was all very muffled, the door was really thick, and we couldn't really make out what they were saying, which is why we didn't hear what happened until they started screaming. Before the psychic friend had finished asking again, the phone apparently chucked itself across the closet and smashed into the wall, like someone had thrown it. That's when they came out. Needless to say, we were all well and spooked and decided to call it a night. We never spoke about Mandy again. My friend Jenny's ghost is something I still struggle to explain to this day. This happened on Tuesday. I keep going back to it trying to find an explanation, so I thought I'd share it here. To set the scene, I worked in an office on a floor with other offices that all share the same set of 2 bathrooms, one for men and one for women, and a hallway that connects all the offices. You have to type in a code to get into the bathroom, I guess to prevent people from other floors or outsiders using your bathroom. Each bathroom has 3 stalls and hand washing stations plus air hand dryers. The ladies' bathroom receives enough traffic from the different offices that it's rare to be alone in there. For this reason, I rarely poop at work. On this particular day, I had an urgent need, so I fast walked to the bathroom, hoping that by some miracle the bathroom would be empty. On my way there, these 2 ladies, presumably from other offices, were walking down the same hallway to the bathroom, talking to each other loudly. Their loudness was irritating me, and what was even more irritating was they sped up to walk at a pace to follow me into the bathroom, so that they wouldn't have to punch in the code. I was annoyed, but I couldn't very well slam the bathroom door in their face, so I let them in, and we each proceeded into the 3 stalls. I remember the thud of all 3 of our bathroom doors closing and the click of the locking. They stopped talking after going into the stalls, and I proceeded to focus on my business. At some point, I realized the bathroom was too quiet. The usual noises you hear from fellow bathroom stallmates, such as grunting or sighing or just the shuffling of clothes, was not at all audible. I was weirded out, but figured maybe they were just staying really still and quiet for some personal reason. I finished up and left the stall to discover that both of their stalls were empty. The doors were open, and no one was there. The stall doors squeaked a bit more when you opened them, and I hadn't heard them. No one was at the sink, and I hadn't heard either of them wash or dry their hands. There was only one entrance entrance/exit door to the bathroom, and it makes a noise as well, so I would have heard it if they had left. There's no way to leave that bathroom without making some sort of noise, so it was like they had just teleported out of the stalls. I washed and dried my hands and exited the bathroom, contemplating how they could have just disappeared, when I saw them. They were walking down the hallway towards the bathroom, walking and talking exactly as they had been when I had been heading into the bathroom. I ended up holding the door open for them again, except this time it was for them to go in after me and not go in with me. It's so mundane, and it's the first time anything like this has happened to me. I don't know them at all, and I don't remember their conversation. It was some boring, personal stuff. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and theories. I work on the top floor of a building, 6th floor. The building I work at is a government organization with all ministries of the government and over 4,000 offices. I've worked there for a couple of months now, and I know the place pretty well. It was on a Monday, the 10th of December 2018, around past 11 a.m., when something strange happened. I'm posting this to find out if it has ever happened to someone else, because I'm really confused and almost nobody believes me or takes it with the level of seriousness I think this deserves. I'm in my office going through my daily work routines when I get a knock at the door. I habitually respond with a "come in" as I usually do. The client comes in and I process a few papers for him when I notice I didn't have the stamp needed to authenticate the documents in my office. I tell the client to give me a minute to go downstairs to get the stamp. I leave him waiting for me in the office. The elevators are at the end of the hallway to the left of my office, 10 seconds away. I take the elevator downstairs, and without wasting any time, I greet the lady in the office I was going to get the stamps from, just around the corner from the elevators, and I tell her the agenda of my being there. She directs me to take it from the countertop, of which I do, and right away leave and go back to the elevators. I get in and I press the button for the 6th floor as I always do. At this time, I say it's been about 2 minutes since I'd left my office. As it goes up, I'm alone in it. I look at the display counting floors going up as I reluctantly do all the time. Then, when the elevator reaches the 4th floor, power cuts off. Although it's become pitch black in the elevator, I eventually locate the control panel, and I press the emergency button, and right away a voice comes on the PA system asking me which floor I'm on. I tell the guy the 4th floor, and in about a minute he shows up. While he is manually opening the doors, power comes back up, and I open the doors, and he asked me which floor I was going to. I told him the 6th. He told me I could use the elevator to proceed to the 6th as electricity was back. I press 6 again, and the elevator closes, and it starts rising again. Looking at the LCD as usual, the elevator passes through 5 and reaches the 6th floor. The doors open normally, and I proceed to go onto my office. As I was leaving the elevator, I feel it has suddenly become a bit colder than it was before, blazing heat in the summer this side. I could say it had almost become cold, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. When I reach my office door, same number on the door, I open the door and get in only to find that the guy who was waiting for me, not there, but a lady I've never seen before sitting behind my desk on my computer punching away keys. Now, very confused, I just briefly pause and look at her. She looks at me with surprise and also asks if she can help me the same way you'd ask someone just walking into your office and just looking at you without saying nothing. I asked her if this was office 6162, my office number, and she said it was. Now, extremely puzzled, I look around to scan the office, and I notice it has exactly the same furniture as mine and the same setup as mine. Not knowing what to say or do, I tell her, "I'm sorry, I'll be back soon, I forgot something." I step out into the hallway, and I look at the door to find it really is my office, and I am on the right floor. I just decided to go back to the elevator, not sure why, and I get in and press 6 again. At this time, I'd say it's been about 5 minutes or so since I left my office. The elevator closes for a brief second and opens up again without going anywhere. Only this time, the guy who works at reception I'd passed on my way down, just outside the elevators, was now sitting there, sitting down as he was the first time I went downstairs. I get out and take the same route to my office, now deciding I'd just confront the lady. When I open the door to my office, I find the guy who had been waiting for me to get the stamp sitting where I'd left him, alone with no one behind my desk. Before I even say anything, he says to me, "I thought you were no longer coming back, or you decided to go for lunch." I say to him, "Why would you think that when I just stepped away for like 5 minutes to get the stamp?" Then he says, "Man, you've been gone for more than 45 minutes. You left before 12. It's like, oh geez, it's 12:35. Now, completely freaked out, I stamp the papers for him and he leaves. When I sit in front of my computer, I realized I had actually been gone for more than an hour. I was 100% sober that day. I had only had a cigarette on my way to work that day. Still sitting there, blank-faced, I quickly note how hot it's become again, as it was that day. I start recollecting my thoughts and try to see what happened. The first thing I note is I'd never seen the guy who came to rescue me from the elevator before, even though I know most of the workers just by seeing them. I brushed it off because it's a slim chance I know all of them since this was a big place, but I'm sure I've seen everyone who works in my wing. It was a bit out of place. I know you're wondering why I didn't check the neighboring offices. Well, there's an explanation. That day, I was the only one in my department around. Others were at a workshop and others were on a field day. And the only person who was there was one of the bosses that I generally don't talk to. Another thing I remember once I was thinking about is I don't remember seeing anyone at the reception area when I got lost. I also remember that the woman was wearing a heavy cardigan, one that you wouldn't wear in the blazing summer at this time. Other than that, everything was in place. If there's anyone who can try to explain to me what happened, or if it once happened to someone, please let me know. And don't tell me I was high or something like everyone else. I'm from Zimbabwe, in case you were wondering. I work as a dietary aide at an assisted living facility. When most people hear that phrase, they think of a nursing home, cold, clinical, and filled with delusional screaming, but the reality is actually a lot different. The facility in which I work feels more like a lavish hotel, almost like a big, cozy house. Assisted living is often seen as the first step towards complete dependence, with complete dependence being a nursing home, as most of our residents can function entirely on their own, but may need a bit of help with mobility, memory, or simply don't have the ability to take care of their own homes anymore. Thus, we have a wide variety of residents, some of whom are only in their 60s and are nearly independent, up to residents reaching 100 who need to have nearly constant assistance. One of our residents, we'll call her Barb, was one of the former. She was one of the younger ones, able to administer her own medication, get herself up in the morning and remember meal times, and just generally able to think straight and care for herself. I've had my job for about a year now and started when I was 17. Barb and I have always had a pretty close relationship, with her always asking about my grades and my home life, and always showing me pictures of her grandkids and whatnot. She had a very teasing, snarky, and sarcastic attitude about her, one that I found humorous and enjoyable, especially whenever I returned the favor with my own sarcasm. Overall, we were always pretty close. Naturally, when you work in a facility in which multiple people in the past have died, you expect some hauntings. I'm certainly not a psychic or anything, but I am often able to tell when a place is haunted just by a strange feeling that I get. The first time I recall this happening was after the death of my friend's mother. Her house had a completely different feel, and I was unable to sleep there anymore. She thought I was stupid until she woke up one morning to see her mother standing in the doorway. As I said, I'm not a psychic, but I am a bit sensitive to the paranormal. The first time I entered the facility, even in all of its warmth and energy, I got that sort of off feeling. Co-workers warned me that it's not rare to hear voices in the kitchen and to see pots and pans go flying, which would eventually become almost a weekly event for me to witness. Some people were scared to be alone in the kitchen, but I honestly never felt that. Even knowing that the place was haunted, I simply didn't feel as though I was in any danger. If anything, I felt less alone. as though I were in the presence of residents I hadn't had the chance to meet. A few days ago, I was doing dishes in the kitchen before dinner. My fellow aides had not come in yet, and the cook was on break. I noticed that there was a lot more strange activity than usual, whispering from the back mop room, hanging pans swaying in the non-existent breeze, and movement just out of the corner of my eye. I ignored it, as this was still something that I was accustomed to. The only thing that I had found odd was that Barb had approached the kitchen door and was staring in at me, as though she wanted something. Usually around this time of day, she would let me know that the coffee on the coffee bar had gone cold, and that it was time for me to replace it. She was very picky about the temperature of her drinks. I nodded, running back to start a new pot, and opened the door to let her know that it would be ready momentarily. But she was gone. I looked down the hall into the dining room and into the living room, but she was nowhere to be seen. I found this odd, since this was usually the time she would settle into the dining room, but I didn't pay it much thought. I went back to doing dishes and eventually felt a hand on my shoulder. Thinking it was the cook, who was one of my good friends who would often sneak up on me, I looked down and realized the hand was not his. It was dainty and wrinkled, olive-colored like Barb's. I turned around, and no one was there. This was definitely weird. Barb knew that the kitchen was off limits to residents, and she wasn't one to play tricks, despite being funny and sarcastic. How could she disappear that fast? I assumed it was one of two things, either my imagination or perhaps just a paranormal aspect I hadn't yet witnessed. After all, it wasn't that far-fetched, given that I had already been hearing and seeing things today. The day went on as usual. We served dinner, got the kitchen and dining room cleaned up, and prepared to leave. I did find it a bit strange that Barb wasn't there for dinner. However, usually she never skipped. Maybe one of her family members had taken her out to eat or something. As my fellow dietary aides and I were heading to the elevator, we passed by a group of residents in the sitting area who told us goodbye as they did every night. But one of the residents stopped us and asked if we heard the news. None of us had, apparently, and he went on to explain. Barb died that morning. Naturally, we were all shocked. What happened? She was young and seemingly healthy. News of deaths usually made it to dietary staff last due to patient confidentiality and whatnot, but to have gone the whole day not knowing. We were used to death, but it didn't make it all that much easier. As I was clocking out, however, it hit me. Hadn't I seen Barb earlier that day? In the afternoon? I was venting to my mom about the death and how it affected me personally. I also told her about what I had witnessed today, since she's a believer in the paranormal as I am. I told her how much it hurt me, especially since the last thing I had told her was, "See you tomorrow," the previous night, and she died before I could see her. What my mom replied with, though, made me feel immensely better. Maybe that's why she visited you. Maybe she wanted to see you one last time before she passed on. As much as I miss Barb, I'm truly grateful that I got to see her one last time, even after she had passed. It makes me feel good knowing that she may have been thinking of me and what I said to her the night before. Just to give you a mental idea of the house, it was a very old house way out in the country that had an even older abandoned house right behind it, with no more than 1.5 feet separating the two. We were pretty much surrounded by fields and underground caves. To start things off, I'll let everyone know that I had my own room in the house, but I only ever slept in the room maybe a total of 5 times the entire time we lived there. The last time I ever tried to sleep in there, something happened that made me refuse to sleep in there ever again. I had been laying there for just a few minutes, tossing and turning about, going through the usual difficulties of falling asleep. Dad was in the living room just a few feet away watching TV. I roll over to my side to find that the pillow next to me has an indentation on it. Now, plenty of things have already happened in the house to let me know that it was haunted, so I didn't just brush it off like some might. I was already freaked out, but nothing too major. I flipped the pillow and fluffed it back up, hoping that was the end of it. It wasn't. I feel something brush against my arm. The arm that is closest to the pillow. My eyes burst wide open, and I see the pillow has an indentation again. As I lay there frozen, my entire bed started to shake. Not violently, but enough that I could feel it. I bolted into the living room, and the first thing my dad said to me was, "What just happened?" He could tell by how white my face was and how wide my eyes were that I had been freaked out. After that, I started sleeping on one of the 2 couches in the living room. We would always hear the screams of little girls in the fields behind the house at night, but never could find anything upon investigation. Dad asked the person that he was renting from about it and was told that everyone reports that, as well as a lot of the other strange activity. One morning my dad woke up with a pack of his cigarettes with all of the cigarettes except for one in the middle flipped upside down. It was a brand new pack, minus the one that he had before to go to bed the night before. He swears up and down that he knows that it wasn't like that before. Every single night there would be footsteps pacing back and forth down the long kitchen, which was right behind the living room. The sounds of high heels at first, then it would switch to heavy boots. This would usually go on from about 12 to 2:30 or 3 in the morning. I watched a lot of late-night infomercials on the TV because of that preventing me from falling asleep. If you didn't wear socks to bed, you would wake up to someone tickling your bare feet. The computer chair, also in the living room, would sometimes lean back on its own, ever so slightly, then rotate a little bit as well. Not a lot, but enough to notice. One night, when I was just about to fall asleep, my remote-control gravedigger monster truck that was in the living room moved about 3 feet on its own. My dad heard it as well, since his bedroom door was open, and there were no other walls between the living room and his. It was a small house. I laughed and told him that was a good one. He told me that he didn't do it.